Hello and welcome to Cruising and Musing. I am your host, Rob. We are a little early for an appointment, so we're going to try to make this video that I've been trying over and over to record and express well. So here goes nothing on this attempt. Go ahead and hit subscribe if you haven't already. Our goal is to hit 50. Please leave me a comment in the comment section. Let me know your thoughts on the matter. And if you like what I got to say, give me a thumbs up. If you don't, give me that thumbs down. Let me know what you think. So today's video is about how the school system needs to earn back the trust of parents. And I say this because I feel like for the entirety of the time I've been in the school system, going back to being a kindergartner 30 years ago until now, the school system has repetitively and continuously done things to give parents reasons to doubt them. And I say this with a bit of a caveat on that I'm not trying to treat what's going on as like a standalone in time, because I am fully aware that a lot of the parents today were going to school, 5 years ahead of me or, up to 10 years behind me, and their kids are now in school today. And this is where we want to start this conversation, is going back to when all these parents were in school themselves in the late 80s through the 90s and the early 2000s. And I know the early 2000s is a bit of a stretch, but some people are young parents. So what I remember most, and have confirmed since henceforth with my studies, is that it was during this time period where you really had kind of a shift to a more liberal ideology with how you dealt with kids in general. The whole Kagan strategy thing stepped forward. The multiple intelligence theory stepped forward. The inclusiveness stepped up and was increased. The class sizes started to get a little bit larger. Teacher pay started to go down relative to other things. And what I think is the most egregious thing of all is that the profession definitely took a swing into being even more, not female oriented, but female. It became more of a female space. 80% of teachers in most areas are going to be women. And I feel like that really left something to be desired as far as justice goes for the male students, especially the young boys. And I'll come back to that in a second. But the other thing that also came out during this time was a zero tolerance policy that almost swept through and becoming, universal, because it sounds good. We've got a zero tolerance for fighting in this school. We have a zero tolerance for drugs in this school. We've got a zero tolerance, zero tolerance, zero tolerance. And, kind of just like when you have minimum sentencing, who does that punish the most? It punishes the ones that have the hardest time adjusting to those rules. So you're going to have an inequitable distribution of who gets punished by that zero tolerance approach, which, inequity is not really a major concern of mine. I am very much, consequence, behavior consequence guy. But when you're talking about the period in life in which you are supposed to be training the kids on how to behave, that zero tolerance policy does not really play into training them how to behave. There's a difference between an 18-year-old and an 8-year-old, and your policies that you put into place need to reflect that. But before I get too much further, down that rabbit hole, let's go back to why this affects parent trust. All of these parents remember what it was like to be a kid in school at this time. So they remember, and they're not going to know things. Remember, most parents, unless they are themselves teachers, are not going to know what an IEP was or is. They're not going to understand, why the teachers were doing what they were doing. They're not going to understand, how we move towards kind of a litigation culture where you need a teacher to be able to say they saw something happen in order to act on it, or get some kind of proof that something happened. Here's an example. Let's say a teacher gives your child a 0 on their paper. Are you going to accept that child got a 0 on their paper for cheating, when the teacher cannot tell you how they know that child is cheating. Because I can look at a student paper and tell you a child cheated on it. I can say, look, right here, he's using words that I know he doesn't know. Ask him what this word means, ask him what this word means. If he can't define those words, these clearly can't be the words he chose to use, and make that expression. But, that's an inference. That's not you caught him cheating red-handed. That's you using inductive logic to determine the child has cheated, because how are they going to write a paragraph using words they don't understand when those words are used correctly in the paragraph? They had to have gotten that from somewhere. But, most parents are going to be like, well, you don't know that for sure. And there's got to be a scrap about it, and it's probably not worth your while pursuing that. Whereas if you catch them with having left the URL at the bottom of the page, you've got them dead to rights, and not very many parents are going to challenge that. They're just going to challenge whether or not he gets another try at that assignment. So a lot of these parents, when they were kids themselves, what they got to see was, the introduction of IEPs, the practice of one student gets to act one way in the classroom while everyone else has to act another way. Well, that might make sense to us as adults to some extent. That's not going to compute for a kid, but that's going to be a memory they carry with them. If they had trouble and got into fights at school because people were bothering them, and they were the ones that were the victims and still got, punished the same way as the aggressors, that's going to stick with them. If they were bullied and the teacher couldn't do anything about it because the teacher couldn't catch the bully in the act, or, the bully was the principal's kid, or, whatever else is going on, they're going to remember that bad time they had in school, and that was, really laid to hands at the injustice that the school system served upon them. Then, to build on top of that, even after they become adults, most of my adult life, I can't think of a single positive story in the news about schools. Even as a kid, we heard about Columbine when I was in, I want to say 5th grade or 6th grade. And it's been a steady stream of them advertising, every incident that happens in a school since then in the news. Nothing good is ever in the news about schools and teachers and students. Only bad news ever makes it onto the TV and the mainstream news flow. And you have that constant messaging coming at them. And then, we all had the pleasure of being in school when No Child Left Behind passed through, and we got to see the school system transform before our eyes, and, this new idea take hold, and teachers get way stressed the hell out. And, here we are taking these tests that have nothing to do with, what we've covered in class, and we're being judged on our ability to take these tests. And you have kids developing test anxiety, and there is no mercy with it. I remember my second year of teaching, we had a kid that used to get so nervous taking tests that she would literally wet herself from the stress response. She was like, 12 years old, and basically had to wear a diaper to take a test because she could not make it through the stress and pressure of the test without urinating. And, that's an extreme example, but, the test anxiety is there for a lot of kids, and they don't have a way of dealing with it. And the fact that all of these tests are required and absolutely forced on them, and they're high stakes, whether or not you get to graduate, whether or not you get promoted on to the next grade level, it's there and present. And the parents of these kids take a look at the mental trauma their kids are going through, and they say, this isn't fair. Why does my kid have to do this? Why can't we do something else, some sort of alternative assessment, which normally we would be able to do in a classroom setting, but because it's ordained from on high, we can't. And, it very much becomes, well, you don't care about my kid. Meanwhile, the kid with the IEP, gets to sit underneath his desk in the middle of class all day, every day, chew gum, have his shirt untucked, and speak out whenever he wants to. Or whatever other ridiculousness you want to insert here that the IEP for the behavioral student allows. That parent and the kids who grew up through this, seeing not everyone get the equal treatment, that's going to be there. That is the seed we have sowed and what we're going to harvest on this. As you sow, so you reap. Moving on, even past the No Child Left Behind and that change in the focus of schools from, students learning skills and learning what they need to learn to them learning to pass the test so the school can look good. Add in as well the sheer number of stupid things we make rules about in schools. When I was a kid, I remember specifically in third grade, they let us dress up for Halloween and wear our costumes to school. And I wore a little cap gun to school cowboy belt. I dressed up like a cowboy. I've got a 6-shooter cap gun with the little snap paper on my waist. Could you imagine if a kid walked in to a school now with a toy gun on their waist? They would lock the entire school down and that kid would end up in jail by the end of the day. People are crazy now, and most of it's driven through their paranoia. But that kid who ends up in jail, now you have another parent who will never trust the school system again because of the injustice their kid suffered for showing up with the toy gun on their hip for their cowboy costume. Let alone, the things that have been coming up through the newspapers. I think the earliest I remember seeing it was maybe it's always 2015. I don't know if that's just the year where I, stopped being where I stopped being flat broke and struggling, and I could start paying attention to things more. But it always goes back to 2015, and right after the Trayvon Martin thing, and with the Ferguson stuff going on, that I remember hearing about these things coming up through the media, where some school teacher in New York holds a mock slave auction, only instead of, I'm not going to say instead of, where they have students, no matter what color they are, this shouldn't happen to you, but they had students pretend to be slaves while others bid on them and, insulted them and jeered at them and everything to give them the experience of the slave auction. Now, this teacher, in this example I remember reading about, it was the white students who were, forced to put on the dirty-looking T-shirts and the slave collars and whatnot and be auctioned, to give them the cultural sensitivity, quote unquote, that they were missing apparently. But, those kids don't deserve it. The black kids don't deserve it. The Hispanic kids don't deserve it. No kid deserves to be put through that kind of experience for, the political acts or ideological acts to grind that the teacher has. And this, sort of stuff has been getting reported on for the last 7-8 years. You move forward and you've got things like the CRT stuff was coming up and being talked about in the schools even before the lockdowns, and where it became really in the forefront of stuff. The LGBTQ stuff was there well before the lockdowns, and it became a front and center issue of uncomfortable things being said, and parents starting to kind of take a fight with it, and being upset that a parent was not informed about their kid decided they wanted to be called another name and things like that. That's all started to really leak forward and bubble up 17, 18, even early 19, but it really came to a head, and all of this comes to a head in the last few years with the COVID lockdowns, because now not only are parents already distrustful of the schools, but they get to see repeatedly the schools show non-commitment to taking rational action. Whichever way you want to look at it, the schools always went with the least liability for litigation, and they always did what they seemed to be playing safe rather than the best interest of the student. And with the way that was messaged across, left a lot to be desired as well. So now you have the parents saying, you don't care about my student and you don't care about their education, you care only about yourselves. Here I am, either they're laid off because they were considered non-essential, or they're considered essential and they're working overtime because people are quitting and going home to take the, unemployment insurance, or just out of sheer frustration of getting overworked to make up for the number of people who were, non-essential being taken off the workforce, and the snowballing effect. Because now you have not only the stress about how the kid is doing in school, now you have parents stressing about, who are unused to having to stress about this, how are they going to take care of their kid? How are they going to feed their kid? How are they going to clothe their kid? How are they getting their kid back and forth to school? School bus driver shortage comes up. Now you have another problem to deal with, and another problem. Teacher shortage. Now you have more problems. The amount of stress involved in having these kids that are school age has gone astronomical in the last few years. And then on top of it, you have this poor messaging from the school system where they don't explain why teachers don't want cameras in their classrooms. They don't explain that it's because the administration will probably abuse that to penalize that teacher for every small discipline problem that occurs in their classroom. Not so much that, they don't want the parents to know what's going on, but because they won't just come out and say that, you have this kind of shifty looking thing going on. At the same time, you kind of have these edge cases with the CRT and the LGBTQ grooming. I don't like that word grooming because I really don't feel like a lot of them are doing it on purpose. They really do feel like they are helping the students. That comes out of that indoctrination of being in college. Colleges being so far left compared to like high schools and normal society that they feel like this is the normal. And by coming out of college and helping other people unrepress themselves and become normal, they're doing good things. I really don't think they do it with the idea of grooming and victimizing the kids. I really truly believe they have the best interest of the kid at heart. They've just been fed full of ideas that, make them a little off target on what they're doing. And, so you have all of this going on at the same time. It's being hidden from the parents, or, they're telling bold-faced lies to the parents that this isn't happening, when the parent can get on the internet and see that it is happening. Look at the poor father in Loudoun County whose daughter was assaulted in the bathroom. Here you have a full-on physical sexual assault and rape occurring, and the county is still telling this poor father that he's the crazy one, that there's nothing to worry about, and there's no problems at hand. And he's getting drug out of the school board meetings. The victim's father can't even speak at the school board meetings because the school board doesn't want to face the issue and deal with it. And that's the kind of things that you see in the news, and even though it's not your school district maybe that did it, it's the school system as a whole, and further erodes the trust in the school system as a whole, and we really need to address that. And again, the only way I can think of to do this is to increase transparency. When you make a decision on why something's going to be the way it is, you need to be able to tell the parents. I think that, IEPs perhaps shouldn't be subject to full privacy when it requires the cooperation of the public at large for that to work. So, for example, you might not want to tell everyone about a child's learning needs, but, if you have a child who has an IEP because they have behavioral outbursts that they quote-unquote can't control, maybe they should, that should be public knowledge of, hey, your student is going to be in a classroom with 5 students who have behavioral IEPs, where if they act out, the teacher's not allowed to intercede. Here's why, here's the legal reasons why, and, it just is what it is. So those parents can make informed choices on how to deal with those things and how to work with the teachers. Because, maybe, just maybe, knowing that the teacher has 5 of those students in that classroom and not being able to transfer their kid out of the class because there's no room in other classes might bring that parent to decide to come in and volunteer every now and then, or might bring one of the IEP parents in to volunteer to help manage those things if we had that greater transparency. But right now we hide those kinds of problems and we hide those issues. And I want to circle back to something I said at the start about how, the school system is so overwhelmingly female on the instructor level. I want to go all the way back to when I was a kid in grade school. They diagnosed me with ADD, ADHD. This is not something I suffer from. And that's not something that you cure in people. I was just a little boy full of energy that was used to doing farm work, cutting up trees, splitting logs, doing yard work, working hard to get all that energy out of me. And I couldn't sit still very well in class. And it really became an issue, like towards second and third, fourth grade. And I'm not the only one who ended up on Ritalin when I shouldn't have been. And that Ritalin fucked me up. Like to this day, I don't feel emotions in the same way other people feel emotions. Like it deadened me inside. It took all the energy out of my cells. It turned me into a walking zombie, a walking angry zombie, for the years of my growth and development, where I was, because some teacher couldn't handle the fact that, I was moving around a little bit too much in the back of the classroom after the fifth hour straight of sitting there still, you know. And I want to emphasize this, that, we really need to take a look at, are we overdiagnosing ADD, ADHD, or are we simply not providing enough recess time and stimulus time in the pursuit of chasing these standardized test scores? Because it's not normal for children to sit still like that. It's a very unnatural activity. Children learn by interacting with adults. They learn by doing, they learn by dialogue, they learn by you model it for them, and they mimic the behavior. So maybe we should be taking a look at what it is that we're asking the kids to do that's so unnatural, aka sit there for 7 hours nice and still, and restructure school to where it's more reasonable. I've said before, even as a social studies teacher, I don't feel like social studies is a huge thing to be teaching little kids. They're not going to remember the details. They're too young to really appreciate the important details. So why don't we have an extra hour of recess for those little kids? So, they get to school, they do one class, maybe do some reading and whatnot. They go to recess. They come back from recess. They do another class. They go to lunch. They come back from lunch. They do another subject. They have another recess in the afternoon, come back, and they do their final subject. Yeah, that's a lot less time in the seat learning, but that also gives them time to develop their social skills and learn other types of things on the playground, while at the same time they're keeping themselves at a managed energy level that'll probably make them much healthier having that extra exercise and much happier having gotten to move around some more. That's one big solution. Let's bring more recess in to the schools. Let's give those kids more downtime while they're at school. Even if we have to extend the school day a little bit, let's give those kids the time to get the energy out of their system so they can focus and stop medicating our children so heavily. And then furthermore, let's be transparent with the parents. Let's let them know when there's, problems in the classroom. Let them know where the sources of those problems are. Let them come in, work with us, see them. Let's give them lessons after hours, teaching them how to access the curriculum, see what's in the curriculum, become familiar with the curriculum themselves. Let's, give them the ability to show up, say, to the parents' meeting after hours and ask those questions of staff members of, hey, why is this in my kid's book? Why is that in my kid's book? And get real answers for that so that everything is in line, and people who understand tend to be more rational people, more rational actors than those who don't. Thanks for listening. This has been Rob. I got to go in here and talk to my tax guy.